Ava throttled the engine of her single-engine Cessna, the propellers slicing through the crisp Himalayan air with a persistence that mirrored her own. With every bank and turn over the rugged terrain, the vastness of the mountains reminded her of her insignificance. Yet she flew on, a solitary figure against the grand canvas of snow, rock, and sky. Ava had always been drawn to the skies, to the sense of freedom they offered, a freedom that the ground, with its endless rules and constraints, could never provide. Up here, she was more than just Ava. She was a part of the wind, the clouds, and the infinite blue. But as she maneuvered through the towering peaks of the Himalayas, a terrain that demanded respect from even the most seasoned pilots, the weather began to shift. Within moments, the clear skies turned treacherous, engulfing her aircraft in a tempest that seemed to materialize from the very ether. The Cessna shuddered violently as sheets of rain battered the fuselage, each droplet a harbinger of the storm's might. Lightning forked the sky, illuminating the churning abyss of clouds that had replaced the once tranquil heavens. Ava fought valiantly against the storm's fury, her hand steady on the controls despite the turbulence that sought to claim her and her aircraft. She had flown through rough weather before, had danced with danger on more than one occasion. But this storm was different. It was as if the very mountains themselves were rising up against her, commanding the winds and clouds to bar her passage. The radio crackled with static, voices from the ground reaching out through the maelstrom, a futile attempt to guide her to safety. But the words were lost amidst the roar of the wind and the relentless drumming of the rain. Ava was alone, a lone soul pitted against the wrath of nature. Then, with a violence that left no room for escape, the storm claimed its due. A gust of wind, fiercer than any that had come before, seized the aircraft, wrenching it from its course. Ava's heart raced as the ground rushed up to meet her, the jagged peaks of the Himalayas looming like spectres in the storm. With a final desperate maneuver, she managed to avoid a direct collision with the mountainside, but the damage was done. The aircraft, battered and broken, careened through the air before crashing into the snow-laden slopes. As silence settled over the scene, the storm continued to rage, indifferent to the plight of the solitary pilot who now lay amidst the wreckage of her plane, high in the mountains of the Himalayas. The adventure that had begun with a flight into the unknown had ended with a descent into a struggle for survival, a struggle that would test the very limits of Ava's courage, ingenuity, and will to live. Ava's consciousness flickered back like a weak flame in a storm. Her head throbbed in sync with her heartbeat, a dull, persistent reminder of the calamity that had just unfolded. The cold was seeping into her bones, an uninvited guest that threatened to overstay. She blinked slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dim light provided by the flashlight wedged awkwardly against the cockpit's control panel. The wreckage of her plane felt like a tomb, entombed in the suffocating embrace of the Himalayan snow. Ava's breath formed small clouds of fog in the air, each exhale a visible testament to her survival. She flexed her fingers, relief washing over her as she realized she wasn't seriously injured, just bruised, battered, but alive. Survival instinct took over. Ava knew she had to get out, to see the sky, to breathe air not tainted with the scent of metal and fear. She reached for her helmet, its surface cold and reassuring to the touch. With the flashlight in one hand and the helmet in the other, she began the arduous task of digging a tunnel through the snow. Each movement was a battle against her own body, which screamed for rest, and the snow, which seemed endless. The cramped space of the cockpit offered little room to maneuver, and every scoop of snow was a small victory. Time lost its meaning as Ava worked, driven by the primal urge to see the stars again. Finally, her hand broke through the surface. Cold, fresh air rushed in, invigorating her senses. She pushed herself out of the tunnel, emerging into a world of serene beauty. The night sky was a canvas of infinite stars, each one a distant twinkling promise. The moon illuminated the snowy expanse, revealing the sheer scale of her predicament. She was over 10,000 feet up the mountain, a speck in the vastness of nature's grandeur. Ava found a sheltered spot near a cluster of rocks. Her hands, now numb, fumbled with the small survival kit she always carried. She managed to start a fire, the flames a small beacon of hope in the endless night. Huddled close to the warmth, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. Thoughts of her family back home mingled with memories of her years flying. The skies had always been her sanctuary, a place where she felt most alive. Now they had betrayed her, casting her into this frozen hell. But Ava wasn't one to succumb to despair. She knew the descent at dawn would be treacherous, a test of her will and skill. As the fire crackled and the stars watched silently, Ava made a silent vow. She would survive this. She would walk out of these mountains, not just for herself, but for those waiting for her return. The first rays of dawn sliced through the darkness, signaling the start of Ava's daunting journey. She awoke stiff and cold, her body protesting every movement. The fire had long died, leaving behind a pile of glowing embers. Ava stood up, her muscles sore but her resolve unwavering. She gathered what dry wood she could find and started another fire. The warmth was a small luxury in the cold wilderness. Sitting by the fire, Ava allowed herself to reflect on the day. She thought about the small airfield where she first learned to fly, the joy of being airborne, the freedom of the skies. Those memories felt like a lifetime away, yet they fueled her determination. She thought about her family, her friends, and the life she was fighting to return to. That night, under the vast Himalayan sky, Ava felt a profound connection to the world. She was a tiny part of a vast, indifferent universe, yet she mattered. She mattered to the people who loved her, and she mattered to herself. With that thought, Ava drifted into a restless sleep, ready to face another day of descent. The first light of dawn was Ava's cue to start another day of descent. Despite the stiffness in her limbs and the lingering fatigue, her spirit remained unbroken. After a quick meal of an energy bar and a sip of water, she packed her belongings and set off. The terrain became increasingly treacherous as she descended. Steep slopes covered in a treacherous mix of snow and ice demanded her utmost concentration. Every step was a calculated risk, a balance between progress and safety. Ava's training had never included mountaineering, but her adaptability and determination were her greatest assets. Mid-morning brought an unexpected challenge. Ava found herself face to face with a pack of Himalayan wolves. Their piercing eyes watched her intently, a silent standoff in the frozen wilderness. Ava knew better than to run. It would only trigger their instinct to chase. She stood tall, making herself appear larger, and slowly backed away without turning her back on them. Her heart raced, but her calm demeanor convinced the wolves she was not prey. They eventually lost interest, allowing her to retreat safely. Later that day, she stumbled upon a small stream, its water crystal clear and ice-cold. Ava replenished her water supply, grateful for this small gift from nature. She knew the importance of staying hydrated, especially in a survival situation where every ounce of energy mattered. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the rugged landscape, Ava found a suitable spot to camp. She had become more proficient in setting up her shelter, using rocks and branches to create a windbreak. Her fire this night was more robust, the flames dancing in the dark, a symbol of her enduring spirit. Lying in her makeshift shelter, Ava reflected on the past days. She thought about the unpredictability of life, how one moment she was flying through the clouds and the next fighting for survival in the mountains. This journey was more than a physical challenge, it was a test of her inner strength. She had faced fears she never knew she had and overcame obstacles she thought insurmountable. Ava closed her eyes, listening to the wind howling outside her shelter. She felt a deep sense of connection with the world around her, a realization that she was part of something much larger than herself. Despite the dangers and the uncertainty, she felt a sense of peace. Tomorrow, she would continue her descent, each step taking her closer to home, to safety. Ava awoke to the howling wind, a harbinger of the coming storm. The sky was a brooding canvas of grey, the first snowflakes dancing in the wind. She knew today's journey would be different, more challenging, more demanding. But Ava was not one to shy away from a challenge. As she ventured forth, the snowstorm intensified, reducing her world to a whirl of white. Ava wrapped her scarf tighter, her eyes squinting against the biting wind. Each step was a leap of faith, trusting her instincts to guide her through the blinding storm. The terrain, already treacherous, became a labyrinth of hidden dangers. Ava's focus was unwavering, but nature had other plans. Her foot slipped on an icy patch, sending her tumbling down a steep incline. She came to a stop with a sharp pain shooting through her leg. Ava lay there for a moment, catching her breath, assessing the damage. Her leg was injured, but not broken. With gritted teeth, she fashioned a makeshift splint from branches and her scarf. The pain was excruciating, but Ava's resolve was stronger. She limped onward, slower now, but determined not to let this setback defeat her. As the day wore on, Ava realized she couldn't travel much further. She found a sheltered spot under a large pine tree and set up her camp. Despite the pain and the cold, Ava couldn't help but admire the beauty of the stars peeking through the storm clouds. They were a reminder of the world beyond her immediate struggle, a world she was fighting to return to. That night, as she nestled in her makeshift shelter, Ava's thoughts wandered to rescue. She dreamed of helicopters and search teams, of being whisked away to safety. It was a bittersweet dream, filled with hope and a piercing sense of vulnerability, but it was a dream that kept her spirit alive. Ava drifted off to sleep, not knowing what the next day would bring, but holding on to that glimmer of hope. The stars watched over her, silent guardians in the vast Himalayan night. The morning after the storm was like waking up in a different world. The snow had ceased, and the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow on the pristine snow. Ava, despite the throbbing pain in her leg, couldn't help but feel a surge of renewed hope. She started her day by tending to her injured leg, wincing as she adjusted the splint. Each step was a testament to her resilience, a painful yet persistent progress. Ava's journey was no longer just about survival. It was about overcoming, about proving to herself that she could face the harshest of challenges and emerge stronger. As she limped forward, navigating the uneven terrain, a shadow swept over her. Looking up, she saw a Himalayan eagle soaring high above. Its majestic presence, unchallenged in the vast sky, struck a chord in Ava. It was a symbol of the freedom she yearned for, the unyielding spirit that she possessed. The day wore on, and with each painful step Ava grew closer to her goal. Then as the sun began to dip below the horizon, she saw it. A faint wisp of smoke in the distance, a sure sign of human presence. Her heart leapt with a mix of joy and relief. Civilization was close, rescue was within reach. That night Ava set up what she hoped would be her last camp in the wild. She reflected on her ordeal, the days spent battling nature, her own fears, and her physical limits. She had encountered the raw beauty of the wilderness, faced its perils, and now she was on the brink of returning to the world she knew. As she gazed at the stars, Ava felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had traversed the unforgiving landscape of the Himalayas, survived against all odds, and discovered a strength she never knew she had. The experience had changed her, sculpted her into someone stronger, more resilient, more alive. With the fire dwindling to embers, Ava closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of rest, of peace. Tomorrow she would walk into the arms of civilization, ending her incredible journey of survival and self-discovery. The first rays of dawn bathed the mountains in a soft, golden light as Ava made her final trek toward civilization. Each step was laden with a mix of pain and hope. The sight of the smoke had rekindled a fire within her, a burning desire to return to the life she once knew. As she approached the source of the smoke, the outlines of a small village materialized in the distance. Traditional Himalayan houses dotted the landscape, smoke rising from their chimneys into the crisp morning air. The sound of distant voices and the clatter of daily life grew louder with each step. Upon entering the village, Ava was met with curious and concerned glances from the locals. Her disheveled appearance and the makeshift splint on her leg told a story of hardship and survival. Word quickly spread, and soon a small crowd had gathered around her. Through a mixture of gestures and broken English, Ava conveyed her story. The villagers listened in awe, their faces a mixture of shock and admiration. The village elder, a kind-faced man with weathered skin and gentle eyes, stepped forward. He arranged for Ava to be taken to the nearest medical facility and contacted the authorities to inform them of her rescue. As she was cared for, Ava felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over her. Tears streamed down her face, not of pain, but of gratitude. In the hours that followed, Ava reflected on her journey. The mountains had tested her in ways she never imagined, forging her into a stronger, more resilient person. She thought about the beauty and the peril of the wilderness, the nights under the stars, the encounters with wildlife, and the sheer will to survive. The villagers treated Ava with great kindness, sharing their food and stories. In their simple yet profound way of life, Ava found a deep sense of peace. She realized that this experience, harrowing as it was, had given her a new perspective on life, on the things that truly mattered. When the rescue team arrived, Ava was ready to return home. She thanked the villagers, their faces now familiar and dear to her. As she was escorted to the helicopter, she took one last look at the mountains, a silent nod to the formidable adversary that had taught her so much. The journey back home was a blur, a mix of emotions and a longing for reunion. As she neared her hometown, the thought of seeing her family, of embracing them, brought fresh tears to her eyes. Ava knew she was returning not just as a survivor, but as a storyteller, ready to share her tale of resilience and the unyielding human spirit. As the helicopter landed, her loved ones rushed towards her, their faces etched with relief and joy. The feeling of their embrace was the final piece of her journey, a journey that had started with a crash and ended with a newfound appreciation for life. In the days that followed, Ava's story became a testament to survival and human courage. She often looked back at her time in the mountains, each memory a reminder of the strength she carried within her. The experience had changed her, but it had also reaffirmed her love for flying, for adventure, and for the unpredictable journey of life.